Okay, electric cars have been around. They were the first cars. In 1835, we saw the first vehicles, the very first cars. They were all electric. And for 80 years, nearly until 1912, when they discovered oil in Texas, electric cars led the race. There was actually a time in about 1908 where they thought steam-powered vehicles might beat the petrol vehicles to the line. So this is not new, what we're talking about. Secondly, people think hub motors are new. Well, they're also not new. This is a vehicle from 1901 that was developed by Porsche. So we've really been at this place before. Petrol came in, or fossil fuels came in, and they were a cheap way of making very dense energy that gave us good range and really changed the way we looked at it. But what we're doing today is rediscovering what we've done in the past. So what is it really about? When we look at it, we've got about, and I'm trying to keep it simple, we've got 7 units of energy that go into a vehicle. Whatever those units are, they're petrol, electric, whatever you call it now. In a petrol car in particular, 7 units in, 6 go out of the back in a puff of smoke. Okay, bit of heat, bit of poisonous, noxious gases that are going to put us in hospital at some point, bit of other things like that. And only 1 unit of energy gets to the wheels. If we go to electric vehicles, this is the scenario. So 7 units in, 6 units on the wheel, 1 unit out the back, and the one that goes out the back, everybody always says, oh, what is that? Well, it's heat. So electric motors do get hot, tires get hot, so you do lose a little bit of efficiency, but at the end of the day, that's the story that we're telling. So then the next question that people comes, yes, but there's other alternatives. We should be looking at this. So, okay, let's have a quick look. Hydrogen. Hydrogen is not a fuel. Hydrogen is simply a storage mechanism. So what it takes is I'm wrong. Let's compressed air first. So compressed air, again, it's not a fuel. We can't mine compressed air. So we need to compress it. It takes 9 units of energy to make 1 unit of compressed air. So the cycle doesn't make sense. Hydrogen is the next one people talk about, so fuel cells. And I believe fuel cells will be part of the future mix of the transport industry. I have no doubt in my mind, but it's not the silver bullet. It's not the thing that every single person will be driving. This is going to be an exception, maybe in long-range trucks, big vehicles, those sort of things. We might see hydrogen fuel cells. But the bottom line is you need 2.5 units of energy to make 1 unit of energy inside of a hydrogen fuel cell. So again, it's very wasteful of energy. Batteries are not immune to this. We've got to put about 20% more energy in to get out, so we're 1.2 units in for 1 unit out. And then the other fun one, of course, is petrol. 7 units in to get 1 unit out. Oh. And it's true. Petrol is a good thing, simply because it's really dense energy. So 1 liter carries a lot of information. You can do a lot with it. The next question that people are going to say is, yeah, but hold on. Electricity is still made from coal. So let's have a quick look at this. My background is I'm a physicist, so I'm going to cut through all of the banter around this, and let's just get down to brass tacks. How much coal does it take to make 1 kilowatt hour? Well, let's say 1 kilogram of coal. So 1 kilogram of coal will give us 1.4 kilowatt hours. And in an electric car, an average electric car today, that will give you about 10 kilometers of driving. If you want to make 1 liter of fuel, you need about 4 kilograms of coal. And that's going to take you about 10 kilometers of driving. So now we've got the simple ratio. It's 1 versus 4. Doesn't matter what your process is. You can have cleaner processes and dirty processes. Bottom line is, you've got to destroy 1 kilogram of coal to make the energy that you're going to do. It's going to release CO2. And the other one is going to release 3 to 4 times more. And that's the truth of the matter when we talk about this. So electric vehicles are cleaner. They're not a lot cleaner, but they are cleaner. Of course, I have to throw in my one of our parent companies' adverts quickly, and it's an advertising break now. But really what I'm trying to say is, that's looking at coal as our source. What if we start looking at solar as our source? What if solar is the way that we charge our cars? Then all of that argument just falls out of the bus, because now suddenly we're in a much, much cheaper space. So there we go. Let's look at solar. So back to the infrastructure side. So we're talking about maintenance. The maintenance of petrol cars, I heard in the previous one, some people think maintenance is more expensive. I think something like 27% of British people think that maintaining an electric car is more expensive. Clearly 52% of British people can't describe what an electric car is. So I don't know how they have that opinion in the first place. But let's have a look quickly. So this is what we're comparing. This is a truck motor. So what we've got here, and this is scale to size, by the way. Okay, so the first one, I think it's a Cummins engine. Those people who know motors better than me. So there's the motor and the gearbox, and it gives 150 kilowatts, 760 Newton meters. Go down to an electric motor, size for size, it's the electric motor and the controller, and we're looking at 150 kilowatts, same power, and 2,000 Newton meters. And look at the small package it's in. But that's not all. When we're talking about maintenance, would you rather be maintaining the thing at the top or the thing at the bottom? This is the difference between a petrol and an electric motor. So from a maintenance perspective, the changes we're going to be seeing in this market as we go, what we're going to be seeing is a big change in the amount of services needed and how often they're going to be serviced and how much components go into it. And that's going to radically change this industry. It will mean that 10, 15, 20 years from now, there should be less places that service vehicles. And that's not good news for a lot of people. But it's going to happen, and it's going to happen. We've got to understand how do we transition towards that. Don't let it catch you by surprise. Start to understand that it's going to happen and look at how does your business and how do your supply chains transition and become something different. A lot of people do try to protect jobs. So I've had discussions often where somebody says, oh, but wait a minute, we're going to lose jobs. This is South Africa, we can't lose jobs. I'm pretty sure around the turn of the century, there were a big group of people complaining that they're going to lose their jobs. And their job was shuffling the horse manure out of the roads, because the roads had horse manure about this thick on them most of the time. So their job was shuffling the manure. And when they could see the automotive vehicles coming, they said, whoa, we're going to lose our jobs. Nobody at that time could determine what job they would get, because when you were buying your initial fossil fuel, who knows where you bought your fossil fuel from in the early days? Any takers? From the pharmacy. So you went to a drugstore to go and buy a little bottle of fossil fuel, which you would put into your car. And of course, once the lines got really big at the drugstores started to specialize and gave you a crate of fossil fuel that you could carry out. And at some point, somebody got this great idea that instead of putting it into little glass bottles and giving it to you, go and tip in your car, let's rather put it down there and actually pump it straight into the car. And that's where that came from. But at the time that the jobs had been lost for shoveling manure, they didn't know that. And all they were concerned about is we're losing our jobs. Ultimately, more people got jobs. So even if we don't know yet what those future jobs are, and believe me, we actually do. We know a lot of them. The previous speaker was telling you about training. These are training people into these new jobs. But at the end of the day, even if we don't know what they are and can't fully qualify, doesn't mean we should stand still. So typical cars of the future, they're normally built with a chassis that is where they contain the batteries, and we are seeing very much that these are two separate parts now. They can separate the car from the chassis to make maintenance and access to the batteries a lot easier. So this is technologically where we can see this technology going and how it's going to work. So you can see most of the car is battery, most of the underfloor of the car is batteries. All right, as we move forward, we've got to start looking at what we call the back office systems. So we've got to deal, and I won't go into great detail here, but basically what we have to deal with is we've got to deal with communication systems. So somebody was saying, oh, but you're just charging a car. Well, let's take the petrol industry. So what we're going to be doing from the fossil fuel industries, yes, we've got the garage, the place where you're going to charge your car. We've got to distribute the energy. That's, in our case, it's Eskom, and it's power lines, and it's power, and it's mini subs, and it's transformers. And if you think it's not all of these things, well, I can tell you that we've just done a big deployment now, and we're finding that in about 20% of the cases, we're having to upgrade the infrastructure. And we're only installing 60 kilowatt chargers. There are people like Porsche that are talking about 350 kilowatt chargers. There will absolutely be a requirement to upgrade the mini subs, upgrade the transformers, and upgrade the network upstream from the point of installation. So it's really important that we understand this is a much bigger industry. It's not just filling up your car. It's really about trying to bring together all of those aspects that was in the traditional fuel industry, but now delivering that through the electric vehicle industry. So the back office system deals with payment systems. It deals with management systems that manage your actual payment cards. So the collection of that money, defaulting of that money, how that's going to be managed. It deals also with actual communications to the charge points and how those charge points are working. The last thing you want to do is drive with your last kilometer of energy to a charge station that you thought was available, and you get there and says, sorry, not there anymore, or broken, or more commonly, oops, another user parked here for an hour, and he's gone off to go and have coffee even though his car is full. So there's many challenges that we're going to face, and we've got to look at systems and ways of managing that. That's a big part of what this back office system does. Often people would say there's not enough infrastructure in South Africa. So that's the current view of what the infrastructure looks like. And yeah, it's a bit scattered, and some of the smaller areas don't have. That's predominantly AC systems. I'll show you a little bit more a bit later, but the basic difference is AC is a slower charge and a cheaper charger. DC is a faster charge and a more expensive charger. And DC goes directly to the battery. You've got a lot more equipment standing on the side of the road, whereas an AC system expects there to be a level of charging equipment inside the vehicle. It's really just supplying the energy to the car. But at the end of the day, this is the number of charging points. You can see around Cape Town, I think there's 10 or 12 down here already. And you're never going to be more, if you look at where that cluster is, if you're in the central part of Cape Town, you'll never be more than 5 or 6 kilometers away from a charging point. Typically, people who say there's no infrastructure, I always say there's 3 things I know immediately. There's one, they probably don't drive electric, because everybody who drives electric has got an app on their phone that will show them where the charge points are. Secondly, maybe they just don't know how to recognize a charge point, because a charge point doesn't look like a petrol station. It's not these big flashing lights on the corner of a street somewhere. It's a very inobscure little device, about so wide. You can see one of them standing on our stand over there just at the entrance, and it's really not that visible. So people don't know what they look like. And I think once you know what they look like, you suddenly start to say, oh, there's a charge point. And you start to recognize them in your environment. So just to move on from there then, so now what we're going to talk about is just what we call smart grids. So again, it's the infrastructure. I gave you a hint of it earlier by saying there's going to be a lot of challenges that we're going to face. So if we look quickly, it's just a very simple example that I'm taking. So we take 500 homes. We're going to work on 3 kilowatts per home, so it's actually very low. So you're looking at about 1.5 megawatts of energy that need to be provided on the grid for those 500 homes. So it's a very simple little example. If those 500 homes had 100 EVs, we would need 1.9 megawatts. So we've got to push up that energy. It's quite a big push. So it could result in substation upgrades. It could result in different things in that area. It can impact that whole network. If we use smart charging, and that just simply means if you don't need to charge now, we don't charge you now. And the cars the network will talk to itself and say, okay, wait a minute, you only need to be ready with your car by 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. We can charge you later in the evening. We don't have to charge you at 7 o'clock tonight. So we just start shifting that out. And suddenly the requirement drops down to about 1.7 megawatts. Now, maybe we don't need an upgrade in our network. So let's have a look further. Let's have a look at local storage. If homes start to install storage, and you've got some level of buffering, a little bit of that energy that you don't, and it's not a lot, just a little bit of that energy, we could reduce the requirement right down to 1.3 megawatts. And finally, if we start doing smart charging and storage together, we could look at 1.2. So remember, we started at 1.5. So we're able to actually generate a serious saving if we start looking at smarter networks and smarter design technology and smarter ways of managing our networks. And then we will not have the impacts that the people are talking about and the experiences that we're having. So how and where do we charge? This is a lot of the questions that we'll get as well. So the first thing is, well, most of your charging is at home. And if anybody, you might not believe it if you don't drive an EV. Sorry, can I ask? I always ask in the beginning, how many people came in an EV today? Put your hands up, please. Only one. Thank you. All right, I'd like to see that changing over time. We should see a lot more people arriving in EVs. I think the best I've seen, Hitton, right, 4 or 5 in the room normally. Well, up in Johannesburg. Okay, so it is changing. We're starting to see more and more people using EVs. An EV driver will tell you most of his charging is done at home. So, and that's just because the car stands there for a long time. It stands overnight always. It's always convenient. You plug it in when you get in. People talk about range anxiety. Again, I think range anxiety is something spoken about by people who don't drive EVs. So I've never heard Ivan talking about range anxiety. I think I did hear him wanting to beat somebody over the head the other day that was parked at the charge point in front of him, but that's a different story. So at the end of the day, the range anxiety, when you get into an EV, it's always full. It really is. I get into my car at home, at work, no matter when I get in, the car's full. I know what range I can do on that car. If I'm going to be doing a lot of driving in the day, that's maybe a different story. So again, people that look at this, I heard somebody speaking recently, and the guys, it was at the Johannesburg Motor Festival, and the person said, you know, the EV is a second car. It's a good car for a second car. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, the first thing that happens every evening at our house is the negotiation as to who's driving the EV tomorrow. And so it's not the second car, it's the first car of choice by my wife and myself. I tend to lose most of the time. But the winning person is normally the one who wants to drive the furthest, because we know that's going to result in the biggest saving to the family. So on Monday, I had 2 trips to Johannesburg planned. I had to go in, get to a meeting back in Pretoria and back to Johannesburg again. So I was going to be clocking 200 kilometers. My car can only do 130. It took me a better part of 5 seconds to decide where I was being charging in the middle of the day and what I was going to do there. I arranged a meeting there, everything was sorted, did in and out, came back, had a second meeting, charged my car, back to Joburg, back again, no problem at all. So really, range anxiety does not exist in people who are in the vehicles. They understand where this technology is and how you can use it. The next level of charging is at work, certainly at shops as you move up in that tree, and finally on highways, when we want to drive between 2 destinations. So one of the most common questions I get from people when we're talking about EVs, the first thing they say is, what if I want to go to Cape Town? It's like, well, this is now Johannesburg people, clearly. So what if I want to go to Cape Town? And at that point, most people involved in electric vehicles sort of back up and don't really know what to say, and they and they are, and if it's a salesman, he'll say, oh, well then have a look at a petrol car. But that question actually only applied to maybe one day a year. So it's not really often that you drive into Cape Town. But at the same time, we've got to address it. So a couple of slides, I'll tell you about that. Really just what we're saying is as we move up in that thing, there's a bigger time sensitivity. So we're looking for quicker charging. As we move down, less time sensitivity, we can use cheaper and easier forms of charging. And capital cost certainly goes up if you're wanting speed on the charging side. So charging at home is not a new thing, okay? So this is a newspaper advert that went out from General Electric promoting their charging systems. I'm not sure of the year, but based on the car, it's probably about 1880, 1870. And as you can see, there's no place to charge like at home. So it's always been there. This has always been the story. I'm not going to go through them in detail. If you get the slide presentation, you can see this really just gives you an idea of charging times for the different charging technology across the top and for the 3 different categories of cars. So let's call it hybrid vehicles, normal EVs, and the longer range EVs that we're going to see entering the market over the next few months. So things like the I-Pace and the e-tron from Audi will be in the market next year, and both those vehicles are going to have ranges of upwards of 400 kilometers. So that just gives you an indication of how the times change based on the vehicle and what you're going to be doing with it. So what do the charging stations of the future look like? So this is one of my particular favorites, and it's really a little business hub where you can arrange meetings, you can have a bit more of a lengthy time there, probably some really good coffee, and ultimately lots and lots of places to charge your car. So this might be the charging station of the future. Again, it's not a new idea. We've been doing charging stations for the last 100 years. We just forgot about it for about, I think, how many? 90 to 100 years. We sort of clean just forgot about the history that we had. But really, we've been doing it all along. We've understood what the mechanics are and how it's got to work. Overall, we're going to be moving from what we see as a traditional fuel station today, possibly down to a shopping center, where we're looking at charging in these areas. Again, advert for solar, by the way. So you might very, very soon, if you live in Port Elizabeth or if you live in Pretoria, you'll very soon be seeing a station similar to that. This is not what it looks like, but it'll be similar. So the idea is it's a highly visible charging node that sits within the parking lot of a shopping center. So it now makes it really easy. It's nice and visible. So it's not a garage on the side of the road. It's in a place where you can spend a bit of time, you can enjoy yourself there. Just to give you an idea, we took one of the shopping centers. It'll remain unknown, but it's very close to my house. And the shopping center uses about 6 megawatts is their current connection for power. So what we did was we looked at that's 3 different levels of charging. 7.4 is the slow charging. 22 is 3-phase charging, so it's 3-phase charging, still the same type of technology as the 7.4. And we move up to 60, that's DC fast charging. So that's going to charge the smaller cars today in about 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes. So we then said if they put 25% of their parking bays, in this particular shopping center they had 10,000 parking bays, if you put 25% of their parking bays on the smallest possible charger that we could run in public charging, they need 15 megawatts for that. That's nearly 3 times what the center uses. So it suddenly becomes a real interesting discussion. Is if you're using 3 times the energy in your parking lot, which you never planned for, suddenly your parking lot can become a revenue stream for your shopping center. It could be something that you could really make money out of, and it suddenly becomes a very, very different dynamic. Can you imagine what this does to building regulations and changing how you think about building? We've had meetings with a few architects, and some of them are now telling us they are now committed to ensuring that 100% of parking bays are capable of being wired. Because if you build a new building today, you're expecting that building to last 30 to 40 years. So what's the point if you know in theory that in 30 to 40 years we should have electric vehicles that would be consuming most of the parkings in our parking bays? So it's really something we've got to think about. If we look at that worst case scenario, so if we put 100% of the parking bays and we put them on the fastest charger, which I really don't think you'll do in a shopping center, but just for the sake of example, we're talking nearly 100 times the amount of energy just in your parking bay. So it's really scary when you start looking at these numbers, and we've got to understand how that's going to change the dynamic of wiring, trunking and planning within your infrastructures. So what is the growth of the network in South Africa? So let's have a quick look. The network right now, maybe not right now, a month ago, the network looked like this. And this is the DC network in South Africa. So it's not the AC network. I'll probably apologize because I know Hitton's in the room and he'll nail me on this one. There's probably one in Port Elizabeth as well. I just don't know if it's publicly accessible. DC fast charger. 2, publicly accessible with special permission. Okay, we'll put them on for him. So there are 2 down in Port Elizabeth as well. But this is the DC charging network in South Africa. It's where you can charge your car fast. And by fast, we're talking if you have an i3, 20 to 30 minutes for an 80% charge. Okay, so how is that going to change? So there's a project that we're working on as GridCars, and that's what it's going to look like. In fact, that's what it's going to look like before the end of this year. Now, a lot of people say, oh, that's what you say. No, that's what we are doing. The order is placed, the highway is funded. This is what my workshop looked like about a week ago. Those charge points are rolling out. This is not a dream. This is not a maybe. They will be in place before the end of December. You will be able to drive the N1, the N2, the N3, and the N4 over its entire length with any of the EVs in the market today. So that's the intent of what we have tried to do as GridCars, is really to take away this question that says, what if I want to go to Cape Town? And the answer now should be, well, go to Cape Town. Are you not correctly informed? There are charge points everywhere. Take a good look. This is where the technology is going to go and what we're going to be doing with it. So what does this really mean? And again, I'm going to take this to the extreme. If we have to go and replace all of our petrol cars with electric cars, and we can debate when that timeline is and what that plan is, but if we were to replace them all, we're taking about 180 billion spend and we're replacing it with only a 35 billion spend, because electric kilometers are about 1/5 of the cost of petrol kilometers. Now you can work through that list, but at the end of the day, what we end up with, let's assume that we still find a mechanism of collecting the 60 million rand in tax. So if we still find a way to collect the taxes that are currently sitting on the fossil fuels, we'll still end up with 85 billion spent money in our society. Now where does that money sit? That money sits within taxi operators that have suddenly got lower costs. It sits in your pocket, that you've got lower costs on your vehicles. This is an opportunity that really will take us forward in terms of what we do in the country. International projections, 400 million by 2040. Won't go into any great details, but that's really what they're saying. This is what the last 5 years of sales in South Africa. Sorry, my Excel skills are not that great. So the way I say it's the last 60 months, and the thing at the bottom is 60 months. So this just gives you an idea of the sales of hybrid and EV sales in South Africa over the last 60 months. Then on the right-hand side being now, today, well, about 3 weeks ago. So that just gives you some idea. There's about 2,000 hybrids in the market and just under 500 pure EVs. And that's pure EVs, not battery, the others. So this graph just looks at those pure EV numbers, and at the EV numbers in total, and looks and says, ultimately what we've got is in that we have the Nissan Leaf, we have the i3, and you'll see the i3 is the yellow, the orange and the grey lines. All electric vehicles is the yellow line, the top one, and the blue line is Nissan Leaf. So it just gives you some idea of where each of those sales went and what's happened over time. Not going to take it into the detail of this. This is a model that we've been working with that sort of covers how the EV industry will grow in South Africa. I'm going to zoom into 2 parts of that. The first one is just to give you some sort of idea, and this is assuming that we stop selling fossil fuel vehicles in South Africa in 2055. Who thinks that's reasonable? Hands up if you think that we'll stop or will we stop earlier? If you think we'll stop earlier, put your hand up. 2055. Okay, so the rest of you, I'm assuming, think that we would stop after 2055. Do you realize the rest of the world is between 2035 and 2040? So that's an important thing to note. So if the rest of the world is planning to stop the selling of fossil fuel vehicles between 2035 and 2040, question that's asked to me I heard it being asked. It said, so where do you think you're going to buy your cars from in the last 15 years of that period? You're not. Because people are not going to be manufacturing them. We're not going to get them here. We can't fall behind. There's this view that South Africa can fall behind the rest of the world. We can't. Because we will not get product. And if we think we'll make them ourselves, OEMs don't manufacture only for one country. They'll manufacture here because they know they've got a market locally and a bigger international market. If nobody overseas is buying fossil fuel vehicles, why would we be manufacturing them in South Africa? It doesn't make sense. So this is a very, very pessimistic view of what we will see in South Africa and how those numbers will change. So the other piece I just want to touch on, and I think it's quite an important one, this is a very simple model. Don't worry about too much of the complexity in it. It compares fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles over a 12-year period starting in 2025 on the assumption that the fossil fuel vehicles cost 20% of what the normal price for an electric vehicle is. Now that's ridiculous. Everybody's going to say that. Maybe not, because Europeans are going to be trying to throw away their cars and nobody wants them. So they might come down here to Africa where we get them at 20% of their real value. So it's actually very viable that that could happen. Now, if we do that, we buy petrol cars at 20% of what the actual electric vehicles are. What we're going to find is that by the time we get to the end of that 12-year period, we are poorer, because we would have spent 440 billion on petrol cars and only 406 billion on electric. And that takes into account fuels, maintenance, and capital cost of the vehicle. We cannot afford, as Africa, to fall behind. It'll tie us into a circle of poverty that will destroy our economies. So we have to respond. We have to respond faster than the rest of the world, because this is critically important to us. We don't want to become a dumping ground, and we don't want that dumping ground because people are saying, you get in the car almost for free. Okay, we'll take it. It'll tie us into a poverty cycle that we cannot get out of. So, again, I won't go through it, but this is really just what all the OEMs are planning and where they're planning to take this technology over the next few years. Thank you very much.